This is the turtle project, and we're going to start by looking at the top of the shell. Now, you can tell the difference between the top of the shell and the base of the shell because the base of the shell hasn't got all of those markings in the centre. So you're going to start with a piece with the markings in the centre, which will be the top of the shell. And I'm going to add some decorative stitching to the top. Now I'm going to start doing this just by spiralling in slowly on each of these panels. Now you can use any of the decorative stitches on your machine. There are lots to choose from on the modern machines these days, so you can really go to town on this. I've actually used just a bit of a stabiliser on the back of here. It's actually our super stiff batting, and that should be available on the show or on the Craft Yourself Silly website. And you can use this, and it's a great option to give a little bit of rigidity to the project as well. So I'm just going to keep going round, adding spirals to these shells, and I will see you in a minute when they're all done. That's the first one done. 19 more to go. Once the outer edge of the shell is finished, we can start putting together all the fins. The fins all come as pairs. There are two pairs of the front flippers, and then there are two pairs of the back flippers. So all you're going to do is put these right sides together and then stitch a 1/4 inch round the edge all the way around. Leave the base of all the fins open, so on the back flipper it'll be here, and on the front ones it'll be this side here, and then we can start to turn them right side out. There are three parts to the head, the two side pieces and the bit that runs along the chin, which is this piece here. So first of all, what we're going to do is fold those on top of each other, and sew all the way from the pointy bit of the beak all the way up and over and to this end point here. Leave this end open, and then we're going to take this other panel, split these two open, and sew this one in from point C, which is the more rounded end, to point D, which is this piece here. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch that together now, and I'll come back to you once it's all in place. So my head is all stitched now at the first line that you do around the top there, and then adding that bottom piece in. Now the bottom piece won't go right the way to the back. There will be about 1 inch or so at the back, which you just stitch these two pieces together. Once that's done, that can be turned right side out, and then we can add a little bit of stuffing. So once your head is complete and you've turned it right side out, before you add the eyes, it is worth just adding a little bit of stuffing first, just so you can make sure that when you put those eyes in, you get them in the right position. They are marked on the pattern, but it is worth just stuffing it first, just to make sure you get them in the right place. And then what I like to do is just use a little seam ripper and just get it in and out the tiniest part of that fabric, and just pop a little hole in, push the eyes through, and then use the safety catches to clip them on at the back. Once that is complete and your eyes are in, you may want to kind of take the stuffing out, put the stuffing back in to do that, to make it easier. Then when you get to the back here, now he's got what looks like an awfully long neck. Now this isn't the case, because the next step that I'm going to show you is why you've got this extra fabric at the end there. But what you want to do to create the shape is, instead of folding the neck that way, you want to line those seams up and press it in place so they're kind of sitting on, the seams are sitting on top of each other. Then we're going to take it from here and add it to the back. So what I've got here is I've got the base of the turtle with that inside piece cut out, and then I'm going to line up all of my flippers and my head in place, and I want to line them up so when I stitch this inner part of the base in, I'm going to just catch each of these within that seam. So what I've done is lined them up with the inner edge and I'll do the same there. Once I press this, I'll do the same there for this, and then just pin that in place. Now, because you're sewing this onto here, you've got a couple of different options to do this. Now, you can hand sew it, obviously. What you'll find is this line here, so not where you've cut, that next seam line in, that will line up with this line here, so that you'll be able to either stitch those by hand in place, or you can do it by machine, which you'd have to line those up and then quite carefully sew all the way around. Your other alternative is just to place that on top and use a satin stitch on your machine all the way around over the top of all of these. So that's probably the easiest, because you're working on a flat piece. If you would like the challenge and you'd like to take it a step further, then what you can do is either just by hand fold those in as you stitch all the way around, or if you're going to do it by machine, what you're going to have to do is just stop and start, just easing that fabric round as you go. But what you need to achieve, whichever way you decide to do it, is all of these elements, so the flippers, front and back, and the head, trapped within these two layers. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hand stitch it in place, so I will come back to you once that's all ready. So everything's now stitched in place, and you can see I've just left a little gap on the side there to allow us to stuff it later. And the next step is to kind of release some of this fabric and to stop all this crinkling. You just need to nip round and put some little snips in all the way around that edge that you just sewn, and then it's off to the ironing board just to press that nice and flat. So I've been to the ironing board, given that a quick press, and now it's just the final assembly. So here's the shell part that I was working on earlier with all of the stitching on. I've just trimmed off that excess batting or wadding from the edge, and it's the super stiff that I've used on this particular one, just to give it a little bit of extra rigidity. And then we're just going to assemble it. So it's as simple as sewing those two pieces together. Now, if you're not that confident with your stitching, what you can do is, again, just sandwich them together. And then if you're hand stitching, maybe do a blanket stitch around the edge, or just a quick whip stitch just to sew all of that in place. If you're going to do it with a machine, then what you'll need to do is pop them upside down, and then just make sure you tuck in all of the flippers, because you do not want your flippers or your head to be wrong side out, and then that goes over the top. Line up all of these little kind of shell marks with the ones that are on the top, pin all of that in place, and you'll actually be able to sew all of the way around on this, because if you remember, we left a little gap in the side for turning right side out. So I'm gonna go ahead and pin this in position and quickly whip it around with the machine. All pinned up and ready to stitch. Now remember, you are going to go all the way around the outside on this, just because you've left that gap on the inside to turn it right side out. If you haven't left that gap and you've stitched all the way around on this part, then you're gonna need to leave a gap on that outer edge. So yeah, we've got our lovely, what is almost a tortoise pasty, so we are going to, sorry, a turtle pasty, and we are going to stitch all the way around this outside edge and then turn the whole thing right side out. So now it's complete. I'm going to turn my tortoise pasty inside out. Just before I do though, I'm just going to run around this outer edge and just check that I've caught all of those pieces. And you can see there's a couple of little bits that maybe aren't quite as good as they could be. So I'm going to quickly run back around those before I go ahead and flip this right side out. This portion here has actually missed completely, so I'm going to put a couple of pins in there, and that'll just be because I've been taking the pins out earlier than I should have done, but that's easily fixed. While you've got it like this, you can just pop a couple of pins back in and whiz back round. So I'm happy with that. I've got all of my bits in there, so I'm just going to quick fix stitch on there just to hold everything in place, and just a little bit of forward and backwards as well, just to make sure, because obviously this is going to be under quite a lot of tension when you're turning it right side out, so it's definitely worth making sure you've got a really good fix on there. So now we are checked front and back and we are all good. We are going to turn out our turtle pasty. So the best thing to do is the head part, which is the bulkiest, is to try and get that through first. And obviously you've put some stuffing in there, but hopefully that stuffing is, move that out of the way, the stuffing is quite soft, so you'll be able to just slowly and gently pop the head out. And then once the head's out, you should find it much easier to turn everything through. Obviously the shell is going to be fairly stiff, so just take that bit through again slowly and get it turned all the right way out. So that's our little turtle turned the right way out, and the last job is just to add some stuffing to the shell. And then if you want to, it's sometimes nice to actually just stitch a line back in round the top of that shell. That should line up with the line in the back here, but you want to do all that as a very final task once you've closed this little part up here. So I'm going to go ahead and put some stuffing in, and then I'll show you how to close this with a ladder stitch. I've added a little bit of stuffing in there, and the last step is to just seal up this gap here. So I have a piece of thread, I'm just popping a knot in the end, and we're going to use a ladder stitch to do this. It's the same as you'll see on the hedgehog project from this Fabazine as well. So we're going to go into that seam allowance, that fold in there, and just pop the needle through from the inside to the outside. And then we're just going to turn this around so hopefully you can see a little better. And we're going to go back and forth between the two sides and create a ladder, hence ladder stitch. So we're going to come in and out of one side, and just make sure I'm not wrapped around the flipper there, and then bring it across and come in and out of this side. And you can use the lines printed on the pattern as a template, as a guide. And what you're creating is the little rungs, the little stitches that go back and forth like that. And then if I just do a couple more, you'll be able to see where it gets its ladder stitch gets its name. So there's another one in there, and then back to the other side and another one in there, and that creates that little kind of back and forth stitching that you can see. And then when you're ready, so every kind of 4 or 5 stitches, when you're ready, you just pull it tight, and that hides all of your stitches completely. So you can continue doing that all the way up to the end, and that will close the gap in your turtle. And then the last thing I would be tempted to do, I mean, he's beautiful as he is, like that, or if you want to, I would actually top stitch around the edge just to create a kind of a little lip and a bit more shape to him as well. So I shall go ahead, close the gap, and then put a little bit of stitching on the top, and then I'll show you the finished result. I'm just top stitching around the shell at the minute, and there's one thing that you need to take into consideration while you're doing this. If you want the flippers to be completely movable, then you need to top stitch the shell without catching the flippers. If you want them to stay in place, then you need to top stitch and then go over the top of the flippers like that. But I want mine to be floppy flippers, so I'm going to pop them underneath the shell, and I'm just rolling the edge of that to keep it nice and flat and in line with the edge, and then I'm just stitching around that outer edge of stitching that I already got in place. And the same goes for the head. If you want that to stay out, then you can stitch over the top of it at this point. If you don't, you need to tuck it underneath before you stitch round.